everyone. So today I want to show you how I painted this picture. Pretty nice. I'll show you the steps of how I did this painting and explain some basic acrylic painting techniques with you so that you can understand it a little bit better.
The first thing that you'll notice is that I painted my canvas pink. I use this as a background color, and it's a technique called toned canvas. I like to use this to make my colors a little richer, and it helps give a good background and foundation to your canvas. I start by laying down some of my colors, and I like to go background to foreground. So I'm always going to start with what's farthest away and work my way to what is closest. So I start at the top with my sky, and I just start blocking in some big details. I'm not too concerned about having anything right. I just want to get the colors where I generally want them. You'll notice I left a spot open for the pink to show through, and that's going to be where I put my moon later on, so I don't have to cover it completely. And then as I work my way farther down the canvas, I'm going to use a technique called a loaded brush. And that's where there's two different colors on my brush at the same time. When I do that, it likes to mix together, and it actually creates a really nice blend when you paint it on the canvas. Now I'm going back in and adding some shadows where I want them to be, putting in light blues, dark blues, and mixing together the magenta and blue to create some purples. I can always go back and add shadows in or lights in where I want them to. And I'm generally using a loaded brush often with more than one color so that my colors blend together a little bit better throughout my picture. Now another technique that I like to use is working from dark to light. That's why I went from dark at the top down to lighter at the bottom. And then I'm going to block in where the basic part of my moon is going to go later on. But before I do that, I want to try a new technique called splatter painting. And that's where I'm going to take watered down white paint, take a bristle brush, and then flick it with my finger to get some cool effects to look like stars. Now this takes a little bit of practice to find the right consistency of water and paint. I like to use different things from around my studio, so I took a small cup and I started tracing it with that watered down white to get a perfect circle for my moon. And then I start just putting in a base coat of white so that I can get just a good foundation for what I want in my moon. Then I can go in with some purples and some pinks, and just to get some shadows in there for the crevices and the craters that are on the moon. And here comes some happy little cloud technique that I love to do. So I'm mixing up some pink and purples for our technique of scumbling. Scumbling is when you take your paintbrush with only a little bit of paint and scrub it very lightly over the surface of the canvas to create some really realistic looking clouds. Now you want to do this kind of almost haphazardly and move your brush around very freely because clouds move around freely. And you can still see through to the night sky because you're lightly scrubbing where you want those clouds to be. And what you're going to do is slowly build up the value in those clouds by working dark to light. So I'm starting with a dark purple or a medium purple, and then starting to build in some lighter tints and shades as I go. So I'm going to put some lighter purples and scumble that in, then maybe switch to some light pinks, even lighter pinks, and then my very last pass will go in with some white paint. Clouds are my absolute favorite to do. I love scumbling, and I like figuring out where the clouds are going to be located in the sky. They take a little bit of practice, but they're not super hard because clouds can be any shape you want. I do like to dry multiple layers, especially if I'm building up from dark to light with my clouds. So that's why you saw me using the hair dryer. You can scumble with dark colors as well as light colors. And then I can switch to a small brush and start to do some little tiny parts of highlights and little details rather than larger shapes of clouds. Remember, scumbling is where you scrub your paintbrush kind of in a circular motion lightly across your canvas. And the clouds that I did are also a good example of working background to foreground. I did the sky first, then the stars, then the moon, then the clouds. I worked backward, forwards. So after everything is dried in the background, I'm going to start to work on the foreground. And these are going to be the trunks of the trees that are in the forest in this picture. And this is going to show working big to small. So I'm putting in some big basic shapes of trunks and then where the dark shadows are going to go. And then I'm going to put in the small details of the branches. So I start working my way from the top and getting larger little squiggles as I go down the trunk of my tree. You'll see it better as I zoom up here, and I start with the top, put in little dashes and squiggles, and as they come out, they're going to come out farther and farther as I work my way down. And I'm going to do that with all of the lines popping up on the bottom of this canvas. So I'll start filling in the trees, and they're smaller at the top and larger at the bottom. Now this only takes a little bit of practice to get the hang of it as you go along, but the more you try out doing trees like this, the easier it becomes. And you can either have the branches facing up diagonally, or they could be pointing down diagonally. Whatever you choose to do, just make sure you're consistent in the way that the branches are hanging, either facing up or facing down. Now I like the ways that the trees looked, but I also wanted to add in some scruffy little plants or twigs or things that were popping up along the bottom. I dried that really well, and then I wanted to have some highlights showing along the tops of my trees. So what I did was I mixed up some lighter blue, and I just kind of hit the outside top edges of the branches of my trees to make it look like the moon was reflecting off of the tops of those trees. Now I'm going back into my moon and adding in some more shadows, some more texture, just by tapping my brush and maybe doing a little bit of scumbling. And then I'm going to go in and add some bright white highlights with just plain old white into both my moon and my happy little clouds, just showing where some highlights would be. The last technique that we're going to go over is called glazing. And that's mixing up a very transparent layer of color and putting that on top of a background that you've already done. So I have a liquidy kind of yellow gold, and I'm going to lightly put that on top of the clouds that have already been dried. And this is called glazing, almost like putting a delicious glaze on top of a donut, except this is with color. So it's adding just a tint of a color on top of what you've already done. Then I add my signature to the bottom and it is completed. I'm really excited on how this turned out and I hope you like it.